Good day. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada for Reason to Resist on August 24th, 2026. What you just saw was footage from a meeting between Turkish President Recep Erdogan and the child-murdering war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu in late September of 2023, less than 3 weeks before Israel's genocide in Gaza began. After that meeting, Netanyahu's office issued a statement in which it disclosed that Netanyahu had told Erdogan that ties between Israel and Turkey were improving, and the Israeli PM statement also said the two leaders, quote, decided to continue advancing bilateral relations in trade, economic matters, and energy, close quote. Now, some of you may be thinking, but this all happened before the genocide in Gaza began. But I say not so fast. By the time this meeting occurred, Israel had committed countless war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people, not the least of which was the crime of apartheid, as was well documented years before this meeting by Western human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Israeli human rights organizations like B'Tselem. Israel was committing the crime of apartheid against the Palestinian people for years prior to this meeting, apartheid being the second worst crime against humanity after genocide. I could literally sit here for hours cataloging all the crimes and war crimes that Israel committed not only against Palestinian people, but other peoples of the region prior to that meeting between Erdogan and Netanyahu in September 2023. So what happened on October 7th, 2023? Did Recep Erdogan suddenly develop a conscience and begin to feel compassion for the Palestinian people? Or was it something else? And why did his regime just issue an arrest warrant for Netanyahu nearly 3 years into this genocide? To help us unpack all of these interesting questions, we've invited back onto the program the one and only Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa is a British investigative journalist who is now based in Beirut, Lebanon. Thank you very much for coming back onto the program, Vanessa.
You're welcome, Dimitri. This is going to be quite interesting to unpack all of the kind of kabuki theater that's ongoing in Syria at the moment.
Yes, it's kabuki on steroids. So just to set the table, Vanessa, for our conversation, I wanted to share with our audience and with you, you may well have seen this already, the results of a poll that was done in the spring of 2025 by Pew Research in 24 countries, about half of which were in Europe and North America. And it asked people for their view on Israel. And the median response across the 24 countries was 62% had a negative view of Israel and 29% had a positive view. I imagine those numbers are even worse for Israel now. But what I really want to highlight for you and our audience was that by far the most negative result for Israel in this 24-country survey was Turkey, where a whopping 93% had a negative view of Israel and a paltry 4% had a positive view. And so with that as background, the world just learned, as I mentioned at the outset, the Turkish authorities have issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu, accusing him of genocide and other crimes against humanity. Here you can see a report by Agence France Presse about this arrest warrant. And so, Vanessa, what do you make of this news? And why do you think Turkish authorities have issued this arrest warrant now, almost 2 years after the International Criminal Court issued its own arrest warrant for Netanyahu and his former Minister of War, Yoav Gallant?
Well, I think the arrest warrant is related to the Global Sumud flotilla and the boarding by the Israeli occupation forces of the flotilla, and then the following torture and abuse of the captives from the flotilla. But my first question would be, knowing full well the history of Israeli savagery against any kind of attempt to break the siege on Gaza, why didn't Turkey send any kind of naval protection for the flotilla when they knew perfectly well that it was heading into international waters where Israel again would flaunt international law and board the boats? That's number one. Number two, I think what we're seeing right now, let's go back also not only to what happened in Gaza, but also what happened in Syria and the collaboration between Israel and Turkey in the downfall of Syria, of course, alongside the Zionist Arab Gulf states and the entire Western neocolonialist alliance. But for example, in November, just prior to the attack by Al-Qaeda, or as it's now known, HTS, the put in power government in Syria, there was a meeting
You're talking,
between...
sorry, you said November. I assume you're referring to
November 2024. Yes,
right,
sorry,
right.
My mistake.
Okay.
There was a secret meeting between Ronan Bar of Shin Bet, he was the head of Shin Bet then, and Ibrahim Kalin, the head of the Internal National Security Intelligence Forces in Turkey itself. Shortly after that, of course, we know the history. Jolani led an attack against, first of all, Aleppo, and then rapidly moved down to the south of the Syrian territory and effectively took control of Damascus. And what we've been seeing, in my opinion, is this kind of kabuki theater between Israel and Turkey as to who has control of what spheres of influence within Syria itself. And this has been a kind of ongoing dialogue between the two. There have been previous attacks on Turkish installations and attempts to expand their bases into central Syria just after the fall of Damascus. So this was, I think, in 2025. They tried to establish something in Palmyra and in the former T4 airbase, and Israel bombed it, right? Now we have this story of Turkey apparently trying to establish some kind of airbase and military position at the Abu Duhur airbase, which was taken over by the terrorist forces and then retaken by the Syrian Arab Army a number of times during the 14-year regime change war that was waged against Syria. And during those battles for the airport, the runway had been very badly damaged. It was then repaired once Jolani was put in power. But the interesting thing is, Dimitri, there were 8 airstrikes on this airbase, apparently targeting the runway, so one presumes re-damaging the runway and making it impossible to use, and hitting warehouses that Israel claimed contained weapons and potentially air defense, and that Turkey was intending to enable Jolani to establish an air force and an air defense base at Abu Duhur. But there were no casualties. So if the Turkish were building up such a contingent of military personnel alongside Jolani and bringing in the equipment that would be required to establish a proper working airbase, which one presumes would also include planes, the fact that there were 0 casualties means to me that this was a cosmetic bombing raid. Now, what do I actually think is going on? I think at the moment there is huge pressure on Jolani to normalize with Israel. And I think the threat of there being any kind of conflict between Israel and Turkey on Syrian soil is about the last thing that Jolani needs right now. So both countries at the moment are bringing pressure to bear on Jolani to accept some kind of partitioning in Syria, which would, in my opinion, be Israel in the south. That has been made very clear through the negotiations between Assad al-Shaibani, the foreign minister, and representatives of the Zionist genocidal regime for some time now, that they want a buffer zone in the south. Of course, we know this has been Israel's intention for decades, to take control of southern Syria in order to be able to establish the David's corridor which would stretch up the eastern flank of Syria to the Euphrates in Iraq eventually. And so it's been very clear from the beginning, whether you look at Greater Israel, the map of Greater Israel, or the Oded Yinon plan, this has been extremely clear. But there is, to some degree, a conflict with Turkey, because Turkey wants to maintain the territorial integrity of Syria, and it wants control of Syria as a protectorate of Turkey. That's effectively why Erdogan agreed to recruit, train, arm, and establish the terrorist forces inside Syria from 2011 onwards. They were trained on Turkish territory. And so now we have this situation where both Turkey and Israel have an agenda inside Syria. And to some degree, they are needing to bring Jolani under control to accept both aspects of it. Because Israel in the south, but even Turkey in the north, because the Syrian National Army, which was previously the Free Syrian Army, is of course formerly Muslim Brotherhood, the political Islamist movement that was very much weaponized by the West from the 1960s onwards in Syria to overthrow successive governments, including Hafez al-Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad. And this would effectively mean dominance for those factions if Turkey extends its control and expands its sphere of influence inside Syria. At the same time, Jolani would lose, of course, control over the south. So this is just my opinion, but it's also the opinion of people that I've been talking to for the last 2 days, that this is very much a kind of an agreement between Turkey and Israel to bring the pressure to bear upon Jolani and, you know, the handlers of Jolani's government, whether that's MI6 or Washington. We've also seen some contradictory statements from representatives of Trump, for example. We can come on to that. So where is this heading? I don't think it's heading to a hot conflict. I think there might be more cosmetic strikes by Israel to reinforce the message that they are trying to send to Jolani's government, who is making a kind of, again, another theater of saying, well, we don't trust Israel now. We have effectively agreed to the original security agreement on paper, but now we don't trust Israel. So now we've had the meeting in Jordan between Assad al-Shaibani and Roman Goffman, of Mossad, right?
So Vanessa, I put up on the screen here a map published by The Economist. I don't know whether this is accurate or not, but I just wanted sort of to orient our audience, but also I'm curious, is it your understanding that this is more or less accurate, or was, as of April 2025? So what this is showing is that the Jolani terrorist regime, that's in, I don't know, it's red or dark orange, but the part that includes Damascus, that's what they control, along with a narrow strip of land through Palmyra to the Euphrates. And then, you know, they show a gray area, which I don't know what the gray area is, that's contested.
Turkish, that's the SNA. No, that's the Turkish-backed Syrian Nationalist Army, which I mentioned, which is the former Free Syrian Army, mostly Turkmen and Arabs. It's estimated between 25,000. Some estimates have put it at 80,000, I'd say somewhere in the middle numbering. So those are effectively the Turkish proxy forces. That
you're talking about the dark gray.
The gray area. Yeah, sorry, which areas? Oh,
okay. I was referring to the so the dark gray is this SNA. What do you understand the light gray to be? Is that contested?
The light gray. I'm trying to see where it is.
Because it's not indicated not
really.
in the.
Yeah, it's strange. No, I don't really know. Actually, okay. I'm not sure why they've left that.
And is it your understanding that this area
would be under control of HTS now?
Right. Is your understanding this area in yellow in the upper right-hand corner of this map, that it actually continues to be controlled by the SDF, led by Kurdish militia?
No, Well, there have been further clashes quite recently, but in theory, that they have been integrated into the Syrian Arab, well, no, not the Syrian army, the new Syria army, which of course is made up 40% of foreign mercenaries and terrorists that form part of the militia that brought Jolani to power.
Right. So down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see in a kind of darkish gray there, right next to Israel, the portion of Syria that Israel currently occupies. And just to go back to what you were saying a few moments ago, you said, if I recall correctly, that Erdogan wants to maintain the territorial integrity of Syria, but he wants it to be a protectorate. Does this mean that he wants to push Israel out of the Golan, or do you think he's willing to tolerate Israel's illegal confiscation of that territory?
I think as part of the deal, of course, nothing has been published, but I would say as part of a deal right now between Turkey and Israel, Turkey is prepared to let the southern part of Syria go and the Golan territory. Potentially, and we talked about this before, there may well have been a deal at the NATO summit in Ankara, and I think Trump may have given Erdogan guarantees of maintaining a sphere of influence in northern Lebanon, for example, in Tripoli, where Erdogan has been building up a kind of soft power occupation through NGOs, education centers, and so on. And he does have strong influence there through Jolani, because Jolani is basically currently infiltrating some of the Sunni Muslim communities in northern Lebanon that have a history of supporting Jolani. I mean, you will have seen during the time you've been in Lebanon that there have been celebrations of Jolani being brought to power, particularly up in Tripoli. So in my opinion, there's a lot of negotiation going on right now. Now, that doesn't mean that long-term there isn't going to be conflict between Turkey and Israel. That's very important to make clear, because I think ultimately, if Israel extends or expands into Syria and up that eastern border towards the Euphrates, for example, and of course we know that the Kurdish separatist project was part of a settlement project for Israel also. Israel was backing the Kurdish separatists in Syria and actually across the region in order to have a pre-formed settlement program which they can benefit from by being able to move through and maneuver through that territory with ease. Plus, you know, the Israelis don't have the manpower to occupy the territory that they're effectively expanding into. So like in the south, they need to be able to weaponize the Druze. That's why they orchestrated with Jolani. There was a meeting in Baku just before all the attacks against the Druze in the south of Syria, in the kind of where it actually says other rebels are occupying, so to the east of the red area that extends down to the southern border there. And basically Jolani unleashed the tribal factions that are very much kind of transactional factions against the Druze in order to push the Druze to effectively call for Israel's protection, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. Actually, Israeli occupation has extended quite a bit further than that. They're about 10 kilometers now from the outskirts of Damascus, so they've established occupation further into Syrian territory than this map, which was April 2025.
Right. So switching to the Turkish theater, as you know, I'm sure, Vanessa, the BTC pipeline runs from Baku in Azerbaijan through Georgia, then eastern Turkey down to the Turkish port city of Ceyhan on the Mediterranean Sea. And this pipeline is providing oil to Israel. The oil is, shipped from Seyhan to the genocidal entity and is a major source of energy for Israel. Now, in January of this year, Reuters reported that although official Turkish data showed the trade between Turkey and Israel was zero from June 2024, the maritime shipping firm Kepler, widely respected in the industry, showed that Israel's imports of Azerbaijani crude from Seyhan jumped 31% year on year to 94,000 barrels per day in 2025. And here's the report from Reuters. And this was the highest level of imports from Seyhan of oil to Israel since 2022. So Azerbaijan widened its lead over Russia as Israel's second largest supplier of crude oil. This is all at a time when Erdogan was claiming there was zero trade. Now, Turkey's government said that it did not control where the Azerbaijani oil went, but in November 2024, the Erdogan regime said that exporters using the port of Seyhan, quote, respected Turkey's decision to end trade with Israel, close quote. What do you make of all of this, Vanessa? What's the reality of the energy relationship and just overall trade relationship between Turkey and Israel?
Well, also, let's not forget that Erdogan's son-in-law was purchasing oil, stolen oil from Syria, stolen by ISIS, and then selling that to Israel also very early on in the regime change war against Syria. Israel, I think, takes around 46 or 47% of its crude oil from Azerbaijan, which takes the route that you've shown there on that map. And from my understanding, Turkey is transporting the oil, and there is no way Turkey is taking a cut out of this. And the ships are basically turning off their GPS. They're turning off their transponders, so they're not able to be tracked. So as far as I know, Turkey has also continued to supply metals and weapons to Israel, but very much through similar kind of methods, because in a sense, and this is where also this is important for the future of Syria, is Turkey has always established itself as the head of the political Islamic movement. In other words, the Muslim Brotherhood. And we know historically in Syria, the Muslim Brotherhood factions within Syria have been weaponized by the US, the UK, and the multiple enemies of Syria against successive governments, beginning, as I said, in, I think it was 1957, but going forward to the late 70s, early 80s to try and overthrow Hafez al-Assad, and then again in 2011, obviously, to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. The fact that Erdogan has established himself very much as the head of the Muslim Brotherhood worldwide movement. And when Israel bombed the negotiations in Qatar, there was a transfer of the Hamas leadership to Turkey, right? So Khaled Mashal, who was leading Hamas when Hamas actually effectively betrayed Syria. This is part of the history that people are maybe not aware of. And up until 2017, Hamas were effectively working with Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood inside Syria to try and overthrow Syria. From 2017, when Yahya Sinwar took over the military leadership, Khaled Mashal was very much sidelined. Iran and Hezbollah played a huge part in negotiations. And effectively in 2021, Hamas, as it is now inside Gaza, fighting Israel, came back to Damascus, and there was a degree of normalization despite what had gone on historically inside Syria. But in my
sorry, you mean normalization with Assad, not with
yes,
Golani?
yes,
right.
Yeah, sorry, no, with Assad in 2021. Mm-hmm. But now there is a push for Khaled Mashal and the new leadership of Hamas from inside Turkey to try and normalize relations with Jolani. So in my opinion, this is part of Erdogan's bigger plan to retain Syria as a protectorate, to have a Muslim Brotherhood regime in power there. And not forgetting, this was also the CIA prospectus for Syria. They didn't necessarily want a Muslim Brotherhood government, but they wanted a Sunni Muslim government that would be prepared to do business with them and would accept, IMF loans and World Bank and et cetera, so would be completely debt enslaved to the US. Jolani has achieved that. Perhaps he's not quite the representative that they wanted in power in Syria. So I think this is what Turkey is heading towards, and that includes with Qatar, of course, because Qatar was very much a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Saudi Arabia was more a backer of the Wahhabi ISIS style elements within Syria. Would that work with Israel? That remains to be seen. What it might do, though, is to provide somewhere for Palestinians that are driven out of Palestine to come to. This is my spec, because that idea has already been floated.
Right.
Yeah. So it would kind of make sense to me just when I was looking through everything this morning. The fact that Hamas, and there are, by the way, statements coming out of Israel from lunatics like Amichai Chikli, who's basically saying Syria and Turkey are actually worse than Iran. So, but, Dimitri, what kind of made me so suspicious of all of this? There's too many statements, and the hyperbole is kind of off the scale. I mean, Netanyahu basically saying Erdogan genocided the Armenians and he's anti-Semitic. And I mean, I'm not saying he didn't, but it's too much. If you're going to go to war against a NATO member state, you keep quiet. You prepare for it, but you don't basically announce to the world that that's what you're going to do.
Yeah. We were told that there was a report that Netanyahu's cabal was carefully studying Article 5 of NATO to figure out if they attack Turkey, would NATO come after Israel? I mean, it's laughable. And there was like NATO is going to attack Israel. Seriously? They had to study Article 5. I mean, and Naftali Bennett has been pounding his chest.
They all have. They all have. And it's a bit too much. Like Channel 12, Channel 14 have all been putting out.
It's almost hysteria. Is it? In the corporate media too in the West, Vanessa, they're making it sound like there's a war between Turkey and Israel about to happen any day now. I mean, it sounds to me like you're about as skeptical as I am in that regard. Is that fair?
I am. Short term and midterm. Long term, I was speaking to an Iranian friend this morning, and he said, I think Israel is going to attack Turkey. I said, not now, because right now they need a stable Syria. And Turkey can offer them a stable Syria for now, right? But at some point, of course, Israel is not going to accept the biggest military, I think it is, in the Middle East on its doorstep with a Muslim Brotherhood government. No.
Right.
And, Turkey is kind of, we know what Erdogan is like. I mean, he's pumped up enough that he'll think he's done a great deal. And also Turkey's in economic dire straits. After all the investment in the regime change war against Syria, he literally has nothing to show for it. He doesn't have control of resources. He doesn't have the gas on the Levant coast. He hasn't achieved the Mavi Vatan doctrine, which is control of the Eastern Mediterranean. Economically, they're still hemorrhaging support, really, for Jolani. So he can't afford to keep this going without showing some kind of result for it.
Right. Now, earlier you mentioned, I think you brought up the name of Tom Barrack, and I did want to ask you about that as well. Now, Vanessa, as you know, the Trumpian ambassador to Turkey, Mr. Barrack, raised eyebrows yet again with some recent commentary on Mario Nafal's program. Among other things, Barrack said that Turkey was exercising restraint in response to the Israeli bombing of that Syrian airfield. But he had more to say than that. And just before I share with you and our audience the commentary on Nafal that I think raised eyebrows, I want to remind everyone that this scoundrel Tom Barrack was a bosom buddy of the notorious Zionist pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And if you don't believe me, just check out this article from Politico. This is from February of this year. And I'll read it to you. U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, had a years-long friendship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, but their ties have not generated the same firestorm as others in Trump's orbit. Barrack exchanged numerous emails with Epstein over more than a decade, including writing him in September 14, 2009, 2 months after Epstein was released from jail following his sex offender conviction. And Barrack wrote, "Thinking about you, hope you are good and life is calm again." And then he sent another email, this is just one of many, back in December 4th, 2012, asking Epstein, "How is my role model?" That is the current ambassador of the United States to Turkey. He considered Epstein to be a role model. So here's what Barrack had to say, or some of what he had to say on Mario Nafal. I think this was on Friday.
In the Golan with Syria, they still occupy the Golan against the UN resolutions, against all of the international order.
Or actually, are you confident that Israel has no intention to annex Lebanese territory or won't annex any Lebanese territory? Or that there is still that possibility that you're obviously against, that their intention may be maintaining the status quo for 10 years, and then after 10 years' time, as they've done before, they start talking about annexing the territory. Is that a genuine concern?
No matter what they want to do, right, in the long run, I think they're looking and saying that's probably unlikely that anybody is going to allow us to do that. America's support is waning. Even the young Democrats are coming against them. President Trump has drawn a line of attempting to go moderation. October 27th, this election will be over. No matter what, you're going to have a different setting. So I just think that regardless of what their intent may be now, they know that that's not likely. Now, saying that, in the Golan with Syria, they still occupy the Golan against the UN resolutions, against all of the international order, which has said the Golan is Syria's. So how long do these incursions go on until the temperature comes down?
I thought that the Trump regime had recognized Israel's illegal annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights. Vanessa, what do you make of this? I don't know. I'm bamboozled by Tom Barrack.
Well, you know what he is. I mean, he's not only kind of an Epstein acolyte, but he effectively lobbied the UAE to put Trump in power, the first administration, so in 2016. And then, of course, what he does is he'll then make sure that Trump invests in the UAE. So he's a merchant, basically. And pretty much what he was doing in Syria is exactly the same thing. He was coming in with the deals that are never going to come to fruition. Most of the companies that were being brought in to invest in Syria, I've written about this, were shell companies, facades, fake companies. So it's just about getting the money in and him putting the money in his back pocket. So I think now basically he's ambassador to Turkey. So if you ask me, there was a bit of greasing his palm at some point, and so he made these statements, and then basically he got his knuckles wrapped because he's backpedaled on it very quickly. I think within 48 hours, he spoke to AFP, and he basically said, yes, of course, Trump in 2019 basically agreed that the Golan belongs to Israel, and of course that was based on money coming in from Miriam Edelstein. No, he backtracked on everything. He basically reneged on absolutely everything he said. And one thing actually that I must have missed first time around, what does he mean by a different setting after the election? Is he saying Netanyahu is not going to, I'm presuming he's talking about the Israeli elections.
That's what I understood as well. I think he's saying that the composition of this child murdering Knesset is going to be significantly different and probably will not include Netanyahu's prime minister. Yeah, yes, that is the reality. Although I don't know it would be worse from his perspective, but yeah, I think that's what he was referring to. But as if that's going to change Israel's approach to.
Well, exactly. Or Israel-US approach anyway. You know, it's not. Yeah. It's pretty much you can't divide it really. And Lebanon is already annexed, just not officially. It's already occupied in the south. Yeah. You know, so. That was very odd. And a couple of people sent it to me as if to say, you know, wow, look at what Tom Barrack said. And it's just like, it's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. He's either going to backtrack, which he did, or it's part of the kind of stirring up the hornet's nest and making everyone think that there's some kind of conflict between Israel and Turkey.
This whole episode just drives home what an evil clown show the State Department has become. It's horrible. Yeah, it really is.
Because ultimately, Dimitri, what it is, it's playing with lives. Because, I mean, you know, we're kind of smiling about it because it's so absurd. But it's obscene because what it actually means is the suffering of the Syrian people, the suffering of the people of this region, whether it's Palestine, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, is going to continue while they play these games over their heads, basically, you know?
Mm-hmm. So, Vanessa, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was this Mecca Defense Alliance. So, just to recapitulate for those who haven't been following the most recent developments. So, reports surfaced about 3 days ago, I guess, that Iran had been invited into the Mecca Defense Pact. And I think I saw a report that the origin of this story was an Iranian official. I don't know if the report identified the official, but apparently that's where the claim came from. And then today I woke up and as soon as I opened up my YouTube app, I saw a report on an alternative media program that I watch from time to time that Iran had accepted an invitation, not only had received, but it had accepted an invitation to join the Mecca Defense Pact. And then just before I started interviewing you today, Vanessa, this happened. So the Iranian Foreign Ministry denies receiving formal invitation to join the Mecca Defense Pact. And the spokesperson of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Esmail Baghei, whom I had the privilege to meet in Iran last month, said as follows, quote, "We have not received a formal invitation, but proposals have been raised for dialogue with these countries on matters related to collective security in the region," close quote, which, I mean, there's, I think, always been dialogue, at least at some level, between Iran and these countries about collective security. So what do you make of all this, Vanessa? And do you find it even remotely credible that a serious invitation would be extended to Iran to join the Mecca Defense Pact?
But to join what, Dimitri? We still don't have in writing what the pact means. I mean, this is kind of insane, you know? And honestly, everyone is writing about it. I saw an article in Responsible Statecraft that was based on a statement from a foreign ministry spokesperson in Iran, right? But I can't find, and I've actually asked a few Iranian friends, have you seen this statement? Is this actually being talked about in Iran? And they're all scratching their heads. So it's very odd. I mean, the only reason I could think of why Iran might be invited into it is because Yemen and Ansarullah are really punishing Saudi Arabia at the moment. They're targeting, as you've talked about, the oil facilities east and west. So they're effectively disabling the east-west pipeline, which is supposed to be a sort of an alternative to the closure of the Hormuz Straits, even though it's only, I think, around 7 million barrels per day that can actually go across that east-west pipeline. And they've shut down the Bab el-Mandeb Straits to Saudi ships. They're targeting Saudi ships that are trying to get through there. So it's a bit like going back to the Beijing Agreement of 2023, when China initiated discussion or negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which effectively managed to bring in a ceasefire between Saudi Arabia and Yemen at a sort of fairly critical point. And so I wonder if that's why it's been floated. But it seems to have no substance to it. And ultimately, I can't see Iranians joining a pact that doesn't have any conditions set to it. I mean, there's nothing in writing. And what benefit is it to Iran when Saudi Arabia, as soon as aggression is reinitiated against Iran, Saudi Arabia will be basically back in the war, the US-Israeli war against Iran. So what's going to happen then?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's
are the Saudis going to attack the U.S. military bases on their soil if the U.S. attacks Iran? I mean, it's and Turkey has U.S. military bases, but
it's very odd. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. If it was a rumor, I don't understand who would really benefit from circular, other than we discussed the fact that the pact was very much a Sunni Muslim pact and appeared to be very much excluding any Shia Muslim, I mean, Iran or Yemen to a degree. Now, so are they putting that out to try and kind of scotch that? I did actually see an article written by an American former kind of security intelligence guy, basically saying that's what it was. So he was mocking the fact that people had said, well, this is a Sunni pact, right? It's isolating the Shia Muslim countries and movements. And he was celebrating the fact that now they've invited Iran, it's all nonsense. But then the reality is that I don't think, one, that Iran has been invited, and two, Iran in a million years is not going to be part of something that there's absolutely no conditions set. There's no, there's nothing to actually sign that has any substance. It's not going to happen, especially not right now.
And I just want to point out to our audience, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, Vanessa, that just today, we're now weeks beyond the formation of this pact, according to which we are told Pakistan and Turkey are supposed to come to the defense of Saudi Arabia if it's attacked. And just today, there was a report that yet again, Ansar Allah attacked Saudi Arabia. In fact, what it did was quite impressive from a technological perspective. And this is coming from independent, firms in the maritime transportation industry. It struck a vessel just off the port of Yanbu in the Red Sea, which is like 1,000 kilometers from Yemen. So somehow they managed to pinpoint strike a vessel. This is huge in terms of the oil crisis, because that would mean if the ships leaving the port of Yanbu are not safe, then they can't, they're not even going to be able to deliver oil through the Suez Canal, let alone, through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. So, but the main point here, I just want to stress is that multiple attacks on Saudi Arabia and Saudi assets since the Mecca Defense Pact came into effect. And I've seen no indication, I don't know if you have, Vanessa, that either Pakistan or Turkey have sent forces to defend Saudi Arabia since then. But,
No, exactly. And I think there was, someone told me there was a rumor of a statement saying that if Israel strikes Turkey, then Iran will intervene. And my Iranian friend was saying, like, what? After everything Turkey did in Syria, which of course also led to the deaths of IRGC fighters who were defending the country, and Hezbollah fighters also resistance inside Syria. I mean, this is, so I don't know. It's whether it's trying to kind of sow confusion, create these. Certainly, what does seem to be happening, these weird kind of triumphalist narratives are suddenly, like you said, we're seeing it on YouTube. Certain podcasters are suddenly saying, "Oh, that's it. There's a whole new security umbrella in West Asia, and the US is out, and Iran is now part of the pact." So, but when you break it down, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Do you have the sense, this is my last question to you, I'm curious if you have this impression too, that even by the standards of this region, where there's so much misinformation, that we are dealing at this particular moment in a particularly propagandistic environment? Like some of the crazy ass stories I see coming out, and they immediately get stamped with the imprimatur of credibility. People start talking about them as though they're absolutely true. And like you said, they just don't make any sense. So I don't know. Do you feel like we're in a really an extraordinarily misleading sort of narrative and informational environment right now?
Yes, definitely. And it's incredibly difficult sometimes because these threads do get picked up by certain media outlets and so on, and then they're blown out of all proportion before you can actually start investigating it and saying, well, hold on, this doesn't make any sense because of XYZ, or even logically and rationally it doesn't make any sense at all, right? So yeah, I mean, definitely.
Yeah. The only advice I can offer in that regard to our audience is, just when you don't have any objective evidence to rely upon, you see these stories, just ask yourself, does it add up? Does it make, knowing what you know about the actors that are involved in the story, is it logical? And a lot of the time, I think that'll give you a good sense of what the reality is. But in any case, any final words, Vanessa, before we sign off today?
No, just as you said, I think take a deep breath before buying some of the wilder narratives that are being circulated at the moment, because they just don't make sense in the overall bigger picture.
Absolutely. Don't rush to judgment. In any case, always a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in future.
Thanks, Dimitri. It's always good to be on with you.